Hey y'all, this is Radiant and you're watching Radiant Virtual Ministries. We're heading into chapter 4 of Book of Esther. If you haven't watched chapters 1, 2, 3, feel free to go back and do so. Grab your Bibles, let's dive in. When Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry. Something you should know about Jews and Israel, they are good mourners. They know how to do exactly this. In fact, there are people, I can't remember the name, but it was actually something that could be done in the midst of mourning, is that you would have like professional people that would be a part of your grieving party as you would go to lay your dead to rest back in the day. And this was how they would do it. They would grieve on your behalf, and so he's doing this not after the fact of someone passing away, but this is because of the news of what he just heard. He heard that Haman is commanding or got the king to sign off on having all of the Jews exterminated, an actual genocide of God's chosen people. And he is completely at a loss here. So he is out in the streets. He is renting his garments, putting on sackcloth with ashes, which is just to completely humble himself with full humility and cry out to God on behalf of his people, which is all he could do, right? And verse 2 says, and came even before the king's gate. So he goes where he as close as possible to the king, and for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. So he is set apart. Not only is he Jewish and set apart, but now he is in a state of mourning that has separated him even more so, because you can't go into the king's presence in the state that he is in. And yet verse 3, it says, in every province whatsoever the king's commandment and his decree came. Remember, there's 127 provinces. All the couriers went out to send out what is going to happen within a 24-hour period, that not one Jew shall live, and that all of their goods should be plundered. And this is men, women, and children. It says, and the decrees came, and there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting, and weeping, and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. They knew what to do. They knew what they had been told to do, and they knew how to get God's attention. They had to humble themselves. They had to come together and cry out for mercy from a God that they know sees them, and they know that hears them, because they know what he's done for their people, right? Amen. How many of us just need to be reminded of all the things God's done for us? Sometimes we need to humble ourselves. I need to buy a sackcloth, honestly, toss some ashes over me, and go to that level of mourning. I've said that before, but what a beautiful posture of the heart. We don't need to physically do those things, but that they would do that kind of prophetic demonstration of like, God, see me, hear me. I need to cry out to you. We need you to intervene on our behalf. And they're doing it collectively, all Jews across the land. And verse 4 says, so Esther's maids and her chamberlains, the eunuchs, came and told it to her. Then was the queen exceedingly grieved, and she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai and to take away his sackcloth from him, but he received it not. And I think this was just a way of like kind of getting him presentable. This might have been a way for them to be able to interact. I'm not sure, because at this point he's not able to even go to the level of the entrance to the court that he was allowed to before because of his state. And she's like, go present him something a little more presentable. And he doesn't want it. He doesn't want to be any different than his people right now. He is a Jew, and he is crying out of absolute mourning and humility, and he doesn't need to be covered. He's revealed himself as a Jew. He is not ashamed of that. And it says in verse 5, then called Esther for Hattach, one of the king's eunuchs, whom he had appointed to attend upon her, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. Verse 6, so Hattach went forth to Mordecai under the street of the city, which was before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him, and of the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. Also he gave them the copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, to show unto Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she could go unto the king and to make supplication unto him. Sorry, my phone's dying. To make supplication unto him, and to make request before him for her people. So interesting. This is a husband and wife duo, king and queen, and yet the queen has no idea what's going on. She's just like, what is going on with Mordecai? And so I imagine the news was rather slow. And why would it not be? Because they don't understand, is Jewish. Of course, they would tell her if they knew, but they didn't know. They're thinking that this doesn't concern the queen, I imagine. And so the idea that she's getting this information kind of secondhand, kind of ushered into her. She's checking on the state of Mordecai, and Hatach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. Again, Esther spake unto Hatach and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. Verse 11, all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come unto the king into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that he may live. But I have not been called to come into the king these 30 days. And they told to Mordecai Esther's words. So here Mordecai is saying, girlfriend, you better get in front of your man and you need to tell him to plead on our behalf and say do not do this. And she's saying, but there is something that says I cannot do that. There is a law that says I have to be invited into the king's presence. I cannot approach him. And she is also saying it's been 30 days. Now I imagine that affects there's a lot to that, right? Esther is a kept queen. I imagine there's a lot of concubines. I do not believe this king is just hanging out with the boys all the time. I bet there were lots of women. And so she's probably on some type of rotation. I'm not sure how that works, and I certainly wouldn't be okay with it. But for 30 days for her not to be in the presence of her husband, that must be tough, especially when it came to matters of something like this, where she could have a say if only he would call upon her. And so we're at odds here. Mordecai's asking her to do something, and she's saying it can't be done, or I will be dead. And then it says, and Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, and there are times to do that, by the way, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. He is so confident. He's like, if you don't want to do it, it's fine. God's got us. There's going to be deliverance from this hour, and it's going to come from somewhere, even if it's not going to be you. But I don't know about you, but that motivates me because I want to be a part of the thing that God's doing. And I imagine that got her gears working a little bit, especially if this is her father figure saying this, all right, Esther, if you don't want to be a part of history in the making, it's fine. We'll go somewhere else. She's like, wait a minute, let's see what I can do here. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed, and who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this. I love that line. That line has meant so much to me. There are things that you are called to do at a particular time. The Lord placed you in history at the moment in time that you were conceived and brought onto the planet for a reason. And I think it is very important to ask why that is. I'll leave that there. Continuing on with the story, it says for verse 15, then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go unto the king, which is not according to the law. If I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. Oof. My heart really falls here because there's a tenderness to this. Her heart is never against Mordecai or her people, but she has been placed in this kind of obscure in between because no one knows she's Jewish. Why on earth would she call for such a dramatic thing? They have an insider in the castle, and she has just said, gather us all together, 3 days, fast on my behalf with me, and then I'm going to do the thing that I know I can't do and walk out of. If I go into the presence of my husband, the king, and he has not asked for it, I could be killed on the spot. And yet if I perish, I perish. This is called a dry fast. It's no water and no food. If you have done a dry fast, I do a dry fast every year when I am not pregnant. I believe we do one on the Day of Atonement. And let me tell you something, it gets to you after a day. Something about that is just a long day of, it's denying yourself. It's killing off your flesh, and it's really just afflicting yourself. I believe that there is incredible power in fasting. I think it is one of the most biblical things that we can do, and yet I think it is one of the most neglected things by the modern church today, and I think it's why we are so ineffective in our culture, unfortunately, because all throughout generations they knew we will pray and we will fast. And let me tell you something, if you don't think that people who are on the other side of this thing in witchcraft don't fast and don't pray, they do. And you know who they also stay away from? People that fast and pray, but they do it to strengthen their energy and do all sorts of dark stuff. So it's amazing that we have such in-depth examples of the power of fasting all throughout Scripture. We see it as, in the Daniel fast. We see it all throughout the New Testament, during which, there's times where maybe even husband and wife are called to not have relations while they are seeking God through fasting and prayer. That's an example. Also, John the Baptist, I believe that they fasted regularly, him and his disciples, as well as the Pharisees. They fasted 2 times a day. Jesus fasted 40 days to prepare him for the cross. So there's something in that. This fast is known as the thisesther, and it's a fast of Esther prior to Purim, which I told you was just this past week, that occurs on the 13th of Adar, still to this day. It is now a 1-day fast, and it commemorates the 3 days of Esther's fast in Persia. It's very powerful. I believe that we all would benefit from fasting. If you have an incredible story of fasting and breakthrough that you have seen in your life, I would love to hear about it in the comments. Also, if you feel led to fast, maybe just from this discussion, I would like to hear that as well. And what your thoughts are on fasting. Do you fast? Do you not fast? That is the question. I used to be in a pretty fasted state all the time when I started this ministry. And then I went through a pretty wild time. I had 2 children back to back. And one of the hardest things about not only being pregnant, but also nursing, if I fasted, I would get really sick, which was so frustrating to me, because in my heart and my spirit, that's what I wanted to do. But my body, that just did not agree. I was not called to fast at that time, and I missed it so much. I started fasting a few months ago, and I do it as the Lord sees fit. But I think that if it's good enough for Moses, if it's good enough for David, we saw him fast over pleading for healing for their child, him and Bathsheba's child, for 7 days. Did not happen, but he still did it anyways before he picked himself up and got on with things. Jehoshaphat called a national fast throughout Judah to gain victory over invading the enemies. We see that in 2 Chronicles. Prophet Joel, proclaimed a fast amongst the priests and ministers to prevent God's judgment. Hello? So it must be pretty powerful if it can withstand judgment over God's people. The leaders of Nineveh also called a fast to prevent God's destruction over their city. And then Esther obviously announced that if they would just fast and pray, keep her in mind and seek out God's heart, maybe she could have this plot exposed that Haman has devised to take out all the Jews. And we're going to see what happens in chapter 5 of how that pays off. But there is no way that God does not see us and hear us when we fast. So I just want to really leave that nugget there, because I feel convicted. There's things I'm looking for breakthrough in my life, and yet when's the last time I really got down and fasted and prayed? Not like I skip a meal here and there. I think it's very powerful to have a day of fasting once a week, if that's something you're called to, or maybe it's something that, it's something regular and frequent. I do believe for believers, I believe is what we should do. We do not need to be dependent on the polluted food that's in our food systems. I live in America. It's not something we need tons of, honestly. But I just think that there is wisdom behind these things, and it's not just for breakthrough spiritually. It could also be physical. I tell people that if you are struggling with infertility, fast. You and your partner, do a Daniel fast. I just have seen my huge breakthroughs, gut healing. I've seen a lot of supernatural things with the obedience of fasting. So that is a word for somebody. And if it's you, I'm just going to believe that for you right now. We're going to dive into chapter 6, so stick around. And I hope you're enjoying the book of Esther. Like, subscribe, comment, and I will be back soon. I love you guys. Shalom.